Go on.
Hey, welcome to the Black Spinner Circle vidcast. I'm Al, my co-host Andy. What's up, brother?
Hey, what's going on, man? Not too much. Just very excited about tonight's show.
Yeah.
Very excited.
Oh yeah, man. We got Tim Durling from Tim's Vinyl Confessions, his channel, on tonight, and he's promoting his new book, man. Let It Be Your Guide, the Kansas album review. There you go, man. He was very gracious enough to send me a copy of it. I really appreciate it, Tim. Thank you. He actually reached out to me because I guess you saw my channel too, or like some content. I think you emailed me. You got my email through my channel, and I was like, "Oh, I know Tim. I've seen his channel. I'm a subscriber to it." So, and he was like, "You offered me his book," and I'm like, "Dude, I'd be honored to have your book, man." So he sent it to me, and I got it right here. And it's an album review for Kansas. And Tim, welcome, man. Oh, and we have Joseph Staub as well, a regular on the show. You know,
I am here.
And Tim, let me tell you something. Joe is the resident Kansas expert out of all of us. For me, he blows me away, he blows Andy away. So I was happy to have him on the show because he knows more about Kansas than I do. But I'm hoping to get even more educated tonight. I do love Kansas. I'll tell you my story in a second. But Tim, welcome to our show. Tim Durling, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, guys. This is awesome. And yeah, I was just looking for. I was looking on YouTube at channels I was subscribed to, and I thought, well, who could I reach out to that would be, that this would make sense to talk about? And yeah, you were good enough to get back to me, and yeah, I'm glad to be here, man. And it's always good to meet fellow Kansas fans. And I've, in the course of doing the book, I've met plenty of fans that have made me go, well, I thought I knew a lot about this band, but there's always a lot more to learn.
Oh yeah, definitely. Admittedly, I'm like Rush is my band. Like that's the expertise that I'm on. I know you are too.
Yeah,
I know that's one of your loves as well. Yeah, there you go. I know Joe loves them. I know Andy loves them too. But Kansas now, and look, I got a Kansas. I've had this Kansas mirror.
Oh yeah.
Oh, that is so cool.
I got this from a garage sale, like when I was a kid. I think I was
okay.
I was probably like 15.
Probably came from a carnival originally, because that's where I remember a lot of those rock mirrors coming from.
Yeah, and it's very rare you see them anymore. It doesn't seem like they get made a lot anymore. I got a couple of Rush ones. You're
right. It is. I got a friend of mine, Marty LeBlanc, who's been on the show before. He's a big record show guy, and he's got a wall of old mirrors, and it is just the coolest thing. But yeah, you don't see them anymore.
Yeah. Well, being a New Jersey guy, I live in Florida now. I moved last year from New Jersey, but I lived in New Jersey all my life. And the big thing was the Jersey Shore always had the boardwalk, and they had like the stands. I mean, back in the 80s, we used to me and my brother, we used to go and win albums from there and all sorts of like cool rock and roll memorabilia. Like a mirror like this would be there and stuff, So, so when I saw that, I remember being a teenager, I saw that at a garage sale, and what was it? The guy probably charged me like a quarter or 50 cents or something. I'm like, let me have that.
Yeah.
So it was really cool, man. So now you live where in Canada are you located?
So I'm in Eastern Canada. I'm in the province of New Brunswick, and that we're right on the border of Maine.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm like a half an hour away from the U.S. border. So yeah, it's not exactly a hotbed for classic rock. So I think Kansas came through here in 2011. I never got to see them then. I've only seen Kansas once. I saw them in '94.
Oh, okay. I think I've seen them three times is how many times I've seen them. I saw them first time in like the mid 2000s at a club in New Jersey called the Starland Ballroom.
Yeah,
it was probably like 2004, 2005, somewhere around there. And then I saw them, I think when was it the Prelude Implicit, right? Is that the name of the album?
That was the 2016 album.
Yeah, when they were touring that one, I saw them in a theater in northern New Jersey. And then recently, only like maybe 2 or 3 months ago, I saw them down here in Florida in Clearwater, and
Yeah,
Steve Morse came out and played with them. Man, that was
yeah, I remember reading about that. I would love to see this current lineup. I think it's a really, really strong lineup. I love the last two albums, and that's a lot of the reason why I got excited about doing this book. If this band hadn't still been creating awesome new music, there you go. I don't know how excited I would have been about doing a book if they'd either, you know, basically stopped making new music. I always pick on Foreigner when I say that.
yeah.
Or if they put out new albums and they weren't very good. But that's not the case. They've always been very consistent, no matter what lineup it was, no matter how many years between albums. I just, you know, this has just been a band I've been into for a long time, and they've never quite had that status in classic rock that I think they should. To me, they're right up there with the Rush and Aerosmith and Queen and Led Zeppelin. I think they're right up there. But, you know, everybody knows a couple of their songs, but everybody needs to know all the songs, all the albums.
Yeah. And I'm learning that. But let me just stop us here before we dive completely into Kansas and your book and everything like that. Me and Andy here on our show, we have a little segment we call What's Spinning. So we highlight maybe an album that we've been listening to last week. In addition, you know, for me, like listening to Kansas, there was another album I've been listening to. But Tim, I'm going to go to you first. What have you been spinning the last week?
Well, you can consider this maybe a bit of a preview of shows to come on my show, because I do like to review albums when they come out. I'm listening to this, Mr. Big 10.
Oh, is that the new one?
The new one, yeah.
The new one, okay.
Hasn't been out that long, actually. I've also got it on vinyl.
Oh, cool.
So I've listened to it once, so I'm not prepared to give an opinion on it. I need to listen to it a few more times. And you mentioned Steve Morse. Well, there's a connection. This is the first Deep Purple album Steve Morse is not on. So Simon McBride equals one. And I'm looking forward to digging into this.
I've been hearing good things about that album.
Yeah, since they've been on a roll since they started working with Ezra, and I think they've, except for that covers album, I wasn't too big into that. But the studio albums and new material, all really strong.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, they're such a band that's had like such a research. I love like, when these classic bands have been releasing, like, Kansas, man, I love this album. I was in Walmart one day, and then they had this marked down to $1, man. And I'm like, how the hell can I pass this up? And it's the deluxe version with the
Blu-ray, right?
With the Blu-ray and everything, man. And I'm a surround sound guy. I have a surround setup, and it sounds ridiculously good, even in a surround format. It's awesome. And bands like this that are putting out strong material like this, I love it, man. You know? And Deep Purple, man, another band that's been putting out consistently strong albums, man. I saw them when I was still living up in New Jersey, maybe a year and a half ago, almost 2 years, when Simon was the guitar player then, and I saw them, and he sounded great with that, man. And I've seen them with Steve, who was awesome in his own right. But Simon, man, I think he was like a little closer to Blackmore. Steve Morse has his own.
Yeah, Steve Morse. I remember when when it was first announced that Morse was joining Deep Purple, I was like, wow, what's that going to sound like? It was great, but he does have a very defined sound.
Yeah. If you
heard on the two Kansas albums too. Yeah. It sounds like Steve Morse playing with Kansas.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was a surprise when I saw Kansas this last time, and he came out, and I gasped. I was like, no way, man.
I love the fact that, for the most part, they're not a band that has been combative with past members. And, like Blackmore would never wander on stage with Deep Purple. You know what I mean? Like, it would just never happen.
Because Carrie still plays with them every now and then. Dave plays with them every now and then.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. There's
very few bands where an album like this could have happened in their later years.
Exactly. And that's still I'm glad they put that back out again.
Yes.
Because that was big time overlooked when it first came out.
Yeah, they did a really good job with the packaging on the repress too.
Yeah, that's how I got the vinyl to it.
All right, man. Joe, what have you been spinning, brother?
So, if anyone has followed my escapades on either this show or on our friend of the podcast, Mark Alden Taylor and Jerry Suppe's BS sessions, I am famously antagonistic towards one of Mark's favorite bands. And he broke me down, and I went to the record store and bought a bunch of their CDs.
Oh, U2? Okay.
I bought a bunch of U2 CDs.
Okay.
I am still not fully on board. Not fully. But I am giving them more credit than I have in the past.
It wasn't like
there's some good stuff on here.
It wasn't like
it's not. No, it's not as deep of a love as I have Also, I always liked REM. I just never had deep dive into them. U2 I have famously despised in the past. But I'm giving them a little bit more of an appreciation. But my actual pick is an album that my uncle recommended to me that I just picked up recently, and that is David Gilmour's first solo album.
Oh, okay.
From 1978, I believe, right in between Animal and Wall. And I am really enjoying this album. I think it's a really great bridge of that era of Pink Floyd. I think it's really great to hear what some of David Gilmour's contributions might have been if those two albums hadn't been so dominated by Roger Waters. And it kind of gives you a little bit of a glimpse into David Gilmour developing his sound that you really kind of hear kind of condensed on the wall. And I think it's a really great look into that. I think it's, from everything I've heard, it's his best solo album, in my opinion, from everything I've heard from his other albums. But I've really enjoyed getting into this. If people don't know this album, it's self-titled, David Gilmour from 78, I believe. Really, really great album. Has that kind of Pink Floyd vibe to it, but also has its kind of own thing going on. I definitely highly recommend checking this out.
Yeah.
Good one, man.
Yeah, that's a really big missing link between Animals and The Wall, because Animals and The Wall, they're so completely different, and that fits right there perfectly as a Pink Floyd sound album. That's fantastic. My stuff that I've been listening to, I just got back from Arkansas late last night, so I've been gone for about the past 3 days. So I've been streaming a lot on my phone, and also listening to a lot of Kansas, and also getting ready for our show next week for 1981. But a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about our top 10 nighttime albums. And I threw this one on late Saturday night. I forget. I just absolutely loved it again. Lou Reed's Rock and Roll Animal. Such a great album. And actually, I was reading more about this. The guitars on here were by Dick Wagner and Steve Hunter. And the rest of the band joined the Alice Cooper group as their first incarnation of the Alice Cooper group. So they're all on here right before they moved on to join for a Welcome to My Nightmare.
Is that album produced by Bob Ezrin as well? No, right?
I don't. I didn't see that it was,
because those guys really, like Dick Wagner and I mean they were Ezrin's guys, man. Like
those were his guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bob Ezrin's name is not on here.
Okay, so he probably didn't. Okay.
Yeah. So but all the tracks are from the Velvet Underground songs.
Yeah.
And they redid them in a kind of a hard rock heavy way, because sometimes when you listen to Velvet Underground, you're like, when are they going to get to the point already? Well, they get to the point very well on here, and it's a really good album. I think I told a story a couple weeks ago of how I got into this, when they used to have albums that had midnight. I was listening to it years ago, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And then when they actually announced it at the end of hearing the whole thing, and then I actually found it on vinyl. So my pick is, Lou Reed on Rock and Roll Animal. That's because Lou Reed's a big hit or miss for me. Because I think because after this was the first thing I ever heard from him outside of Velvet Underground. So when I started buying his other stuff, they're like completely different of what I like. So I was like, oh, wow, this is very different from what I was expecting. But this has always been a standard in my live albums as well. So Rock and Roll Animal by Lou Reed.
Cool. All right. I just actually, I'm finally happy that one of my favorite bands is going to be playing down here in Florida. I just bought tickets to see them, and so I pulled this one out. King's X, Gretchen Goes to Nebraska. I love the cover art of that album too, man. So I mean, this is like, if you know, if you're gonna really kind of point, although I love all of King's X's albums, especially the first 5 or 6. I mean, they're essential. But I mean, if you're gonna point one person in the direction of King's X, this is probably the one to point them to. This is normally considered their peak, their magnum opus. Magnum opus, shit. That may come up later. But yeah, man, I just got some tickets for their show. They're gonna be playing Clearwater here in Florida in December. I'm excited. I'm pumped. I've seen them a lot of times, and normally they don't come down here that often. So I'm happy. They're doing 3 shows in Florida. So I guess since they're coming down here, they're gonna play a run of shows. So, but yeah, Gretchen Goes to Nebraska, King's X, one of my favorite bands. So, and that's what's spinning. So let's get to we're already starting to talk about Kansas. So let's get to Tim's book, his great book, album by album review. Now, I noticed that you have a list of names in here. Like I know Pete Pardo. I always freaking his channel. You've been on his channel. Is that correct, Tim?
I've been on it a couple of times. Yeah.
Sea of Tranquility, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I noticed his name on there, but I noticed a bunch of other names. So the format of your book, is it like you kind of asked them or interviewed them, or they just put their input into the book? How did that go about?
Yeah. This book is the same as my previous book, which was about the band Y&T, which is one of my favorite bands of all time.
Great band.
Completely overlooked, underrated hard rock band. And so I did an album review on them called Down for the Count. I had the great Hugh Syme design artwork for it. I'm very proud of that. But the books in general, the album review books, were totally modeled after Martin Popoff's album by album series. I've been very fortunate to get to know Martin. He's been a big help. He's been a mentor to me, helping me get these books out. He says the more the merrier. And the cool thing is we have a lot of conversations, and I'm doing books on bands that he won't. He said there should be books on all these bands. So, yeah, I had a couple of his books. I had the Rush one and the Queen one. The Queen one is one of my all-time favorites of his. It's just fantastic. And the format of the book is sort of as if you had a bunch of people sitting around a table, all fans of the same band. You pose a question and everybody gives their answer. And it could be totally different opinions. They could be agreeing, they could be disagreeing. And that's the format of these books. So what I did is I just reached out to as many people as I could think of that I thought or knew were Kansas fans and could speak to their albums quite well. And I either they hopped on a Zoom call with me. We talked. I asked them the questions, and then I would transcribe their answers, or they would just type them out. And I think Pete Pardo's case, I think Pete typed everything out and sent it to me, and it was just up to had to format it then. But the end result is that it's very conversational, and I just put forth a series of questions for each album. Some of them are more statements than questions, but they're all specific to that one particular album. And in the case of Kansas, there are 15 studio albums, and that's really what I was going after. And I've got more panelists in this book than I have in my previous. So yeah, it's quite a list of names. Everybody stepped right up, and what I really like is that you've got every level of fan. You've got some fans that have been there almost from the beginning, fans that came along the way, and then there's a few friends of mine that I'm happy to say I've introduced to the band and said, look, I think you'd like this album and this album. Why don't you go listen to them? And they came back and said, yeah, these are good. I said, well, you want to take part in this? So that factors in too. And sometimes when you get someone that just hears something for the first time that you've been listening to for 30 odd years or more, sometimes they'll hear something. I'll go, hey, doesn't that remind you of this? And I'll go, well, I never ever thought of that before, but yes, it does. So it's good to get all these different perspectives. I'm very happy with the way it came out. Very happy with the artwork. for a Kansas fan, whether you're a casual fan or a diehard, if you like a good music read, I can say I recommend this book because, it's not just me. It's not just me talking about, yeah, I wrote a great book. No, the contributors, everybody stepped right up and carried this through to make it what it is.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Now, Joe and Andy, if you guys have questions, don't hesitate to chime in. So, I mean, Joe, you want to ask, or Andy, go right ahead. And then we'll just go, you kind of just go around and stuff.
Right.
You got anything for him, Joe?
Yeah, I was going to ask, just for people that might be interested in purchasing the book, what is maybe your personal history with Kansas? Where did you kind of hop onto the band? Where sort of in this whole process did you kind of come into everything?
Well, it's interesting because I was born in 1974, which would place me when I first really started getting into music and listening to the top 40 radio stations and really paying attention to who sang what songs and starting to take in all the musical knowledge like a sponge. And I didn't even know I was taking it in. I thought everybody did that. I thought everybody would buy a cassette and comb through the liner notes. No, not everybody does that. Some people just like to hear a good song, but for me, it was always more than that. And I was always a completist. And if I found out a band had more than just the one album, I'd have to get those two because why wouldn't I like those two? In the case of Kansas, though, it's interesting because I didn't have older brothers and I didn't have, say, older cousins that were into prog rock or 70s rock. So I kind of had to discover that stuff on my own. The first time I was ever aware that there was a band called Kansas was when this song came out, All I Wanted, from the Power album in 1986. I heard it on the radio constantly. Up here in Canada, Kansas were never, they never came up here a lot. So they sold, Left Overture, Point of No Return were big selling albums. They certainly toured up here, but, they were sort of primarily an American success, even though they did well in other parts of the world. But Much Music, our version of MTV, did play that video a bit at the end of '86 when it came out, and I thought it was it was a nice song and catchy. But I didn't get into the band until about 6 years later, in '92. What happened in '92 is I got way into Queen, and yes, Wayne's World had a little bit to do with it, but mostly it was hearing A Night at the Opera at a friend's dad's place for the first time and hearing how varied all those songs were. Because, I mean, when I grew up, when I was a kid, one of the first new songs I remember hearing on the radio was Another One Bites the Dust. So when I thought of Queen, that's what I thought of. But when Def Leppard, Metallica, and Extreme were all singing the praises of Queen, I'm like, I don't get it. But I wasn't hearing the right stuff. So I just went head over heels for Queen. And when that happened, I'm like, okay, well, what other older bands are out there for me to discover? That's when I got into Led Zeppelin. That's when I got into Purple. And along the way, I got into Kansas. And Kansas and Queen were the main ones that I just dove so headlong into fandom. I just wanted to know everything about these bands. So Kansas was really sort of summer '92. I really got into them, which is an odd time probably to get into them, but better late than never. So that's how my fandom kind of started, was around that time.
Cool. My question is going to kind of follow into that because when I was watching your videos for y'all don't know, Tim's got a great page on YouTube called Tim's Vinyl Confessions, and you can tell all his music right behind him. So what my question is, what I ask everyone that I interviewed, what was the first concert you ever went to, and what's the first piece of music that you remember buying with your own money?
Great question. So I mentioned, I'll do the first concert thing first.
Yeah.
Because it's all related. I mentioned 1985, 1986. That was when I really started paying attention to music. Primarily what I did was I listened to the radio and I would record songs off the radio onto my cassette tapes,
Yeah.
mixtapes. And, that's how I consumed my music. I knew what I liked, but I just, you know, I wasn't buying albums per se.
Mhm.
And some people might roll their eyes, but the band that changed that for me was Bon Jovi.
Mhm.
When I heard "You Give Love a Bad Name" on the radio, it was the heaviest thing I'd ever heard on Top 40 radio in
Yeah.
1986. And I Get Slippery When Wet, and again, that's when I realized, oh, they got two other albums. Oh, I got to get those too. So that was my first favorite band, and they were my favorite band for a long time until Def Leppard came out with Hysteria, and then the two of them were like neck and neck. So it just so happens, fast forward to February '93, my very first concert was Bon Jovi, and we actually they played in Portland, Maine, which is about 6 hours away from here. And I actually met John Bon Jovi in a mall walking around with his bodyguard, because
Oh wow.
this is right after he cut his hair, so he wasn't quite as recognizable as he had been,
Mhm.
but we recognized him. So actually, my first two concerts were Bon Jovi because they came back around to the area later in the year. Actually, that would make Kansas my third concert. So they were the second band that I saw. It just so happens. So that was my first concert.
Well, now,
Um,
what year did you see Bon Jovi?
I saw them in February '93. It was a Keep the Faith tour.
Okay, okay,
And I saw them again in December of '93 on the same tour.
yeah.
That's the only time I've ever seen the same band twice on the same tour. Um, so the first music I ever bought, boy, I can remember distinctly the first album. I mean, other than my parents buying me like Disney records and
Yeah.
Sesame Street records,
Mhm.
the first album I remember receiving was the 8-track of the Muppet movie soundtrack, Christmas 1979. That was a current album, right? That was a popular
Yeah.
album. I
Yeah.
think the first thing I ever bought with my own money would have been around that same time, I guess maybe like 1980, 81. I bought the 45 to Waylon Jennings theme from Dukes of Hazzard because that was my favorite show. I think that may have been the first thing that I
Hazard, man.
trotted up to the counter with a little 45 and a little, spindle in it, and
Yeah.
probably 75 cents for a single. I don't know how much singles were back then. Probably not very much. So yeah, that's probably the first thing I ever bought.
Oh, Dukes of Hazzard, man. That was one of my favorites too, man. When I was young.
Every Friday night, man, it was pizza and watch Dukes of Hazzard. That was.
I can relate to that, man.
But the same as you, Tim, my first concert was Bon Jovi as well. But
Wow.
mine was in '86.
Oh, you saw him on the Slippery tour.
Yeah, I did see a Slippery and Wet tour. That was one of the first albums that I went and bought, and I was so excited about.
And who opened for them on that one? Cinderella?
Cinderella for
Oh, that would have been awesome. That would have been awesome. I did get to see Cinderella many years later when they still toured as Cinderella, when it wasn't just Tom Cooper, and they were fantastic.
Yeah, and I had I was born in '74, so we're about the same age. So
Yeah.
So I was able to see them in the 5th grade. My mom got me tickets because she knew what how their music was just everything I talked about. So that's really cool that our first band we saw was Bon Jovi.
Yeah, it was very fitting. I mean, even all those years later, it still meant a lot to,
And you said you saw Kansas was your third concert, right?
Yeah, I would have seen them in April, I think, April or May of 1994. They played a very small place called the Presque Isle Forum. Presque Isle is a little town in Maine. Toto Hydra, awesome.
What's up, Will?
My good friend Will Toth.
Yeah, I do enjoy some Toto. Yeah, it would have been the Live at the Whiskey Freaks of Nature lineup. Although when I talk about this in the book, I'm still to this day not 100% sure that was Phil Ehart on drums. Might have been Van Romain, because I remember thinking that doesn't look like Phil Ehart, but I wasn't really close to the stage. But I mean, it was Richard Williams and Billy Greer and David Ragsdale and Greg Robert on keyboard, Steve Walsh. It was fantastic, and I remember a couple of things that stand out for me about that show. They did the song "Wheels," from the box set, which had that's when I knew that they had a box set coming out. So that was kind of neat. They previewed that song, and they also did the Bells of St. James. I was not expecting to hear that song, and that was amazing. Like that blew the doors off for me. And I remember it being a great show. I mean, if it was filmed, and I heard it back, I might have been like, "Oh man, that was rough." But to me, it was like getting to see the band not that long after I'd gotten into them. It just worked. It was just great. Unfortunately, I've never got to see them again.
See, it's funny because the first times that we both got to see Kansas were almost 30 years apart, but they had very similar kind of stories. My show that I saw last year, Philly Heart only played half the show.
Okay.
And they played Bells of St. James.
Yeah.
And they played Bells of St. James, which unfortunately for a lot of people, they apparently must have dropped that pretty early in the tour last year. They only played it for the first dozen or so shows, and luckily, my show was the second show of the tour last year. And I'm a set list freak, so I was literally the day before my show was the first show of the tour in Pittsburgh. I saw them in Baltimore the next night, and so I was staying up all night, like scouring online because it's the 50th anniversary tour. They teased all this different stuff. I'm like, what are they playing? What are they playing? What are they playing? And you saw all kinds of people on fan pages like put fake set lists up and say they were playing all this different stuff. And then finally, somebody must have seen me comment on some different Facebook pages about stuff and sent me, like, Facebook messaged me the actual set list, and I saw, oh my God, they're playing Pinnacle. Oh, they're playing all this. They're playing Bells of St. James. They're playing like 4 songs from Monolith. They're doing all this different stuff. I'm like, what is this set list? And I was so happy. And for that reason alone, 2 of my favorite things they've put out the past decade or so have been these 2 live albums.
Yeah, I love the fact that this lineup isn't afraid of any aspect of their career. I mean, that Point of No Return live and beyond, they open with Cold Gray Morning. I mean,
they're pulling out
okay
stuff here.
Yeah,
they pull out. I'm pretty. Is it the same one? There's a couple songs from Power on there.
Yeah, they do Musicato, Taking the View. They do People of the South Wind, the acoustic set. Yeah, it's amazing. I love the fact that they're not like, there are certain classic bands that they're just certain periods of their career they just never touch. I mean, think about we're talking about Deep Purple. Think about how crazy the fans would go, and I think in a positive way, if they came on stage and they opened the show with Burn, or Stormbringer, and Ian Gillan was singing those songs. People would be like, "Those are Deep Purple songs. Yes, we want to hear them." So, but the fact that Kansas, they do. They never seem to shy away from any parts of their catalog, which I think is really good. And unfortunately, they do those deeper tracks, and when a band's on stage and they see people aren't paying as much attention, I think it makes a difference. So, you have that small group of fans that are just losing their minds because they're playing something from In the Spirit of Things. Then you got most other people like, I don't know this song. So it's a delicate balancing act. And the sad thing is back when I first started seeing concerts, I didn't keep track of set lists because what outlet would I have had? I had no outlet in 1994 to share the set list with anyone other than just my own. Of course, I wish now I'd started doing it, because that's historical information that, Setlist FM is only as good as its contributors. And sometimes you go on there and say, that just doesn't look like that happened. That doesn't look right.
Well, so, Kansas, unfortunately, is one of those bands that definitely falls into that for like a big period of their history where it's just lost to time. Where
it probably wasn't that different than Live at the Whiskey.
Yeah.
Like I said, aside from Wheels and Bells of St. James, I do seem to remember that for some reason I remember when they were doing Hold On, it was either Ragsdale or Williams, their guitar kept cutting out. There was some technical issues there, but
like with the set list thing, I know one of my favorite things, and we can probably touch again on this later. One of my absolute favorite Kansas albums that I think doesn't get nearly enough attention is This.
Oh yeah.
I
Okay.
think it is vastly underrated. I think that there's a ton of great songs on here, and this tour is very severely underrepresented on Setlist FM.
Yeah.
And you go on YouTube, and there's
might not be a lot of bootlegs of that tour.
Yeah.
Because you can go on YouTube, and there's like full video, like camcorder video of them at like a state fair in 1995 playing pretty much this entire album. Like they're opening up with I Can Fly. They're doing Black Fathom 4. They're doing Hope Once Again. They're doing.
See, that album's very special for me because that was the first new album to come out after I had become a fan. I was waiting for that. I love Freaks of Nature. I mean, I still think it's really, really great. That's upcoming in my deep dive series, which I'm also in the process of doing on my YouTube channel. And by the way, the fact that my YouTube channel is called Tim's Vinyl Confessions, that's no coincidence. So.
Yeah. Did you ever approach it did you have to approach anybody in the band or in a Kansas camp about doing this book, or you just kind of went ahead and?
No, I don't think you have to. I couldn't use their logo without permission. I mean, the pictures that are inside of this book are all from my personal collection. So there's no copyright issues there. I've got a disclaimer in it that said this is not an official publication. I've talked to enough people to say that's all you got to do. Don't use any authorized copyrighted logos or anything like that. And the closest I've got to band members, I mean, I did send some questions to John Elephant and got his answers. So his answers are in the chapters for the two albums he sang on, Final Confessions and Drastic Measures. He was very good about answering them for me. They weren't long answers, but they didn't need to be. But other than that, it was really by the fans, for the fans was my approach for it. But although I did have the pleasure of, I got in touch with Jeff Wagner, who is a writer in his own right, does the Radical Research podcast, but he also worked for Inside Out Music when Kansas were signed. So he got to know them very, very well. He wrote the foreword to this book, and it's a fantastic foreword. And I would highly recommend, if anybody's a big prog rock fan, get Jeff's Fates Warning biography, Destination Onward.
Oh yeah, I need to get that.
Amazing book.
I'm a big Fates Warning fan, so
yeah. So yeah, that book, I'm a junior Fates Warning fan. I mean, I like Parallels. I like that side of them. But when I got talking to Jeff, he said, I did a Fates Warning book. I said, I don't know much about them. So I got it, and it makes me want to get some more albums. And I have. Since then, I've gotten a few more albums. But my point is that no, I didn't approach anybody from the band. Although I have had the pleasure of speaking with Tom Brislin, their current keyboard player. He's got a copy of this book, so that was pretty cool.
That's cool, man. Andy, you got anything for him?
Yeah. What I was going to say was that while I was deep diving into Kansas, would y'all agree that Kansas can be pretty much America's answer to Deep Purple because of the electric guitar and the keyboard interplay? Really catches the spirit of Deep Purple. What do you think about that, Tim?
I've never thought about. That's not the band that I would have gone to, but I don't have any problem with it. Although I will say that in the '80s, some of the albums Kansas put out were probably more like Whitesnake or Joe Lynn Turner era Rainbow than strictly Deep Purple. But yeah, I do hear, the organ, taking up as much of the bottom end as, say, the guitars. And you do have the violin there, which is very classic. There's some classical elements. And it almost, it almost seems predestined that they would have a past member in common when you put it that way with Steve Morse. But I never thought about that before, but because although there are parts in Deep Purple's catalog, no one ever thinks of Deep Purple as a progressive rock band, but I think some of their early stuff is totally prog.
Yeah.
It's very prog, especially
Out of Time and Speed King and very influential to a lot of different branches of rock, power metal and Deep Purple spawned Rainbow. Without Rainbow, there'd be no Dio. So that's really interesting. That I'm going to think about that, but it's certainly not a bad thing to say.
Well, okay, yeah, because that's what kind of caught my attention when you would hear the interplay, just like what the great John Lord and Richie Blackmore would do on the extended tracks, like Space Truckin' or not stuff like that, especially on their big album, um, Machine Head, with the extended songs.
Yeah,
So
Pictures of Home and yeah.
yeah,
Oh
so I
yeah.
was just wondering if you also heard the same kind of thing. What is your favorite Kansas album? I know it's hard to say that because I'm a big Beatles fan and it's hard to pick my favorite Beatles album. But is there one that really sticks out to you that people might go, "Huh, I've never heard that one."
Um, it's kind of a tie between two of them. And I like them both for completely different reasons, but um, I really, really like Audio Visions. I really like that. That's actually the first Kansas album I heard in its entirety, and I heard it here
Oh,
in,
you
in
have
the
that in your book too, right?
in the same order because the songs are mixed up.
That's in
But
your
I,
book, right? The picture of that.
it's in my book. My
Yeah.
first book is all about 8 tracks. It's called
Yeah.
Unspooled. But yeah, I that was one of the first 8 tracks that I found when I started collecting them and looking for 8 tracks of albums and bands that I liked. And I'd never heard anything from it before. And I was just getting into Kansas. I'm like, well, I'll have to get this. I'd never heard of the album before. And then I put it on. I actually had a working player at the time, and that tape happened to work. And I love that album. But I don't know if I could put it as my only favorite because I will always be a Power fan because I just love that album. And I know that's an album that the Kansas purists will say, well, that's their pop album. That's that. I'm a child of the 80s. My first concert was Bon Jovi. I like melodic rock.
Yeah.
So I think that when Kansas dipped their toes in that, they did it extremely well. And I've said this in the book, and I've said it many, many times on many different shows. I think that Power should have done for Kansas what 90125 did for Yes. They should have brought them back. They should have brought them a new audience. They should have retained some of the old audience and made them a name once again, able to headline big places.
Yeah.
Didn't quite work out, but I think it's every bit as good. I think MCA kind of dropped the ball on that. I think they could have gone 3, 4 singles deep. There's hit singles all over Power, but they did okay. It did okay, but it didn't certify, and it just, I don't know. It just didn't seem to have the staying power.
I think on the topic of that, I think MCA kind of realized what they did, because if you look at the production of the follow-up, In the Spirit of Things, the record company was all over that album trying to get a hit single out of it. And if you look at the writing credits, and
that's why, and this is just my humble opinion, In the Spirit of Things is my least favorite Kansas album. But having said that, it's probably the album that I go back to the most for that reason, because I want to love them all. And there are songs on In the Spirit of Things that I absolutely love. I love Rainmaker. I love The Bells of St. James. I love House on Fire. I talk a lot about in the chapter on that book how the concept totally got away with them. They could totally do without any of those songs from the outside writers. Yes. They did nothing for the band's legacy. It doesn't sound like a Bob Ezrin produced album. He wasn't in the best of shape at that time. And MCA totally dropped the ball because within a year of that album coming out, the first time I think I ever saw that was with a hole cut out of it in the delete bin. Yeah. MCA just wasn't a strong label. I'm going to say it because there are a lot of bands that put out really, really strong albums at that same time that just did not do anything. They didn't get promoted. I'm a huge fan of Night Ranger, and they put out an album called Man in Motion in the fall of '88, right around the same time, sunk into obscurity. I think it's one of their best albums. MCA was just a crappy label. If they'd have signed back to CBS or if they'd have signed to Atlantic, or Mercury, it could have been a whole other story. But
like exactly like you said, I mean, you look at this album and you look at the songs that were part of the narrative or that were at least a little bit more hands-on by the band. I mean, you start Ghosts is such an awesome introduction to the album. It's so atmospheric and creepy, and Steve's vocals on this album are amazing. And Steve Morse's guitar on this album is great. And I think you look at some of the songs that are part of that concept, Ghosts, and even One Big Sky has its kind of poppy hook in it, and Inside of Me, House on Fire, The Preacher is awesome. I love when they brought that back for the Device Voice drum show.
That was good. Yeah,
with the choir and seeing Robbie do that, it was kind of weird seeing Robbie do that song, but it was kind of fun.
Again, they're not afraid of of any parts of their catalog. They're like, well, let's try it. I think that was awesome that Steve Walsh sang "Fight Fire with Fire" and play the game tonight. And what that shows when he would sing those songs is just how good a fit John Elephant was for Kansas.
Yeah,
when Steve Walsh would sing those songs, a lot of returning singers won't do that. Like I said, Ian Gillan would never sing one of the David Coverdale songs.
No, all right. So another question that's that's away from the band Kansas, but it has a lot to do with you, Tim. The other day, I was watching a episode of Tim's Vinyl Conventions, and you were showing your 8-tracks by Bryan Adams. So how many? So what got you into collecting 8-tracks, and how many do you have? Because I didn't even know that Bryan Adams even had 8-tracks, because you had them going up into the late 80s.
Yep. That is the primary reason for my first book, Unspooled, an adventure in 8-tracks, because there is this hidden segment that where Columbia House and the RCA Music Service, record clubs that you got music in the mail. Mm-hmm. I have to explain that for younger people because it's you mean like Amazon? No, I mean you had to sign up, you had to agree to buy so many over the course.
No one ever did. And no one ever did.
Yes. And for whatever reason, and I'm not sure why this is, but the record clubs kept making 8-tracks longer than 8-tracks were in retail stores. So there are some really late 80s albums that exist on 8-track, and I've always been fascinated by that. I started to collect 8-tracks around the early 90s. They had no resale value, but when I would see an album I liked, I wanted to get it as many different formats. I had no idea it would develop into the habit it is now. As far as how many, if you'll bear with me for a second, I'm going to turn this camera around. There are...
Nice.
That's awesome, man. Yeah.
Do I have a player for them? No. They're strictly... But so, having said that, if I like a band, I try to get as many formats as I can. Inevitably, that will mean that for most bands, that means that there's going to be some of those ones at the end of the 80s that only came out if you were a member of one of these clubs. They weren't available in stores. And I think most people think of 8-tracks as a 70s medium because that's when they had their peak of popularity. I realize it's a really strange subject to do a book about. That's why I also had lots of collecting stories in there. I got to tell you, it's a coffee table book. It's a gorgeously designed book. My good friend Matt Phillips from Go North Design, who's helped me with all my books, he went all out on Unspooled. It makes a perfect coffee table book. You can open it up. There's eye-popping graphics on it. But at the end, it kind of goes from 1981 to 1988, Andy, because 1981 is the first year that there seemed to be 8-tracks that only existed in the record club forms, that you couldn't go to a store and find them. So that's why I started there. And 88 is when they absolutely shut it down and said, no, we're not making any more 8-tracks. November of 1988 is when.
Yeah, because when you were talking about the ones that you showed about Bryan Adams, you were being very specific about the serial numbers and the labeling on them and the color of the bordering around them. Like,
I'm a hopeless music geek, so a lot of the Columbia House releases had a blue border around the cover, and once you learn what they look like, you can easily spot them. But I just like the idea of these later '80s albums existing on a format that they shouldn't. It really doesn't make any sense because CDs. Columbia House started making CDs available in 1986, so that means there were 2 years where, if you remember at Columbia House, you had 4 choices of format, which is pretty wild. And although I don't understand why they kept making them longer, other than to corner the market, I understand why they finally stopped making them. So, but I had no idea in when I really first started buying albums that they were still making 8-tracks. I would have thought, well, no, that's those don't exist anymore. The only ones I ever saw still around in the late '80s were like my grandparents had old country ones or something. I had no idea some of the albums that actually existed on 8-tracks. So, why like anything, I'm a format guy, so I've got cassettes, I've got records, I've got CDs. I just happen to collect 8-tracks. I'm just there's something about the fact that they're so impractical, and there's so many drawbacks to them. How they would wind up, and because of the limitations of the technology, they had to split the songs up. They had to split the songs in half sometimes to keep the programs the same length or close to the same length. But yeah, that's thank you for watching that. Yeah, I think a lot of people would be like, Brian Adams has 8-tracks. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. I was like, wow, because it went all the way into
1987, Into the Fire. Yeah,
and right before "Wake Up the Neighbors" came out.
Yeah,
it stopped right there.
Yeah. That's why I can say with some confidence that was the last one. Sometimes there are a few where it's like, I don't know, I've never heard tell of one, but it is in those years. So, for example, In the Spirit of Things. Maybe, but I don't think so. But I can't say for sure that it didn't.
So, how many Kansas 8-tracks do you have?
All of them that exist on 8-track. So I've got from the first album all the way through this.
Okay. Was this released on 8-track?
There you go. Boom.
There you go.
Yep.
That's just awesome, yeah.
And I'm assuming just because it was in that period as well, I'm assuming too for the show was probably on 8-track as well.
Oh yeah. The last retail 8-track was Vinyl Confessions. That was the last one made for sale in stores. 1982 seems to be the last year that there were a lot of them made. In 1983, I've only heard tell of about 6 that were made on 8-track for sale in retail stores. And again, and it's in the book, but the retail and the record club ones look very different to each other. So, for example, I just showed you this one. This is an RCA Music Service version of Power. All RCA Music Service carts look like this, no matter what the original label was. So, and ditto for Columbia House. So they basically made everything look like it would have been on CBS Records. By the same token, you never had any CBS releases on RCA Music Service or vice versa. That's why this would be the only Kansas 8-track that's on the RCA Music Service, because the rest of them were all CBS. So if you're going to get them, it was Columbia House. So yeah, the tough ones to get for Kansas. You don't see Vinyl Confessions that much, but you see it enough. But if you're looking for them, it's Drastic Measures, Best of, and Power. Those are the tough ones to get, and that's usually how it goes. It's the I call them RCOs, Record Club Only. If you want to get all of them, there's usually those ones at the end that are really, really rare. You don't see them at flea markets or garage sales or anything like that. You're most likely to find them through collectors, through fellow collectors, maybe that have spares and they're willing to trade or they're willing to sell. If you've got a spare of something that they want, it's a really, really weird. It's a really niche form of music collecting, because 8-tracks have never been cool. Nobody bats an eye about say you collect vinyl. Vinyl's always been cool. But, the 8-track deserves a little bit more
I belong to a couple of Facebook groups that are 8-track because I up until when before I moved down here to Florida, I did have a working 8-track player in my house too. I had one of those kind of like upright, it almost looked like a jukebox, but it had the speaker on the bottom, had the turntable, and then it had the 8-track, and it had a stereo, like a radio too, AM FM.
Okay.
And the turntable actually didn't work on it anymore. Like it didn't spin, but the 8-track still worked, and I had a whole shitload of 8-tracks. So I had it in my basement, and my basement was like my man cave, so I had my whole stereo setup and everything down there. But I had this like console thing, kind of like in the corner of the room, but it was such a when I had people over, it was such a conversation piece because it was such a 70s thing, and just kind of retro and just looked so cool. I ended up selling it. But like, over here at my new house, I'm like kind of making up, I haven't even been here a year yet, but there's still stuff in boxes I'm still unpacking. But I was toying with the idea of maybe getting like a piece like that again, just because it's so cool. Like people come over and like, wow, that's really cool, man, and
So
man,
imagine
let's listen to an 8-track, and in the middle of the Comfortably Numb solo, let's hear it switch tracks or something like that.
It's not a program 3.
that's the cool thing about these. If you were going to do that, I will say this, and one of the groups, the main group is 8-track fixation. I don't know if that's one of the ones that you were on, but that's where I got.
No, I don't belong to that one.
That's where I gained a lot of knowledge about which ones actually were made. It's really weird because not all major label releases were made on 8-track in that period, but a lot of them were. So it's hard to tell which bands got all of them and which there was a cutoff point. But the cool thing about to have a working player, I do know this: they take a lot of maintenance, they take a lot of work. The tapes too, to keep them working right, and people put the time in, and I respect that. But I would just rather collect the 8-tracks, listen to the CDs. That's kind of my.
Yeah, I even had tapes that like didn't work anymore. That like they were all fucked up and stuff like that. Yeah. And people still actually bought them off of me off of those groups because there was a lot of guys that would open them up, fix them, and they were really into the whole technical.
If the cover didn't have any bubbling on it, sometimes that's worth. Yeah. But the cool thing is, if you did have a working player, people would be like, okay, well, we're going to hear a bunch of 70s stuff. But if you had some of these RCOs, you could play. So I was like, you're playing that off of an 8-track, like, yeah. So like Rush, who was the big Rush fan? Hey, check this out. I haven't had this too awful long. This was only.
I was going to ask you actually. Oh, Power! Is that the last one they released?
That's the last one. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So I've got them all now, from the first album through Power Windows. And
because for the longest time, I thought Grace Under Pressure was the cutoff point.
Me too. Because I just thought it was, and then when I joined this 8-track fixation, they're like, there's an RCA Music Service version of Power Windows. I'm like,
yeah, that's awesome.
Well, it just went on my list, so you know what I mean. So it's I will say this: I figured it out the other day. There's about 80 8-tracks that I want now. A reel-to-reel. Okay, so a reel-to-reel, that's a format I don't have anything from.
That's just the 60s thing, really, I think, isn't it?
It is, but it isn't.
Okay.
You'd be surprised if you went on Discogs and saw, again, Columbia House, some of the albums they made available on reel-to-reel all the way through 1984. Wow. I've seen 90125 on reel-to-reel. Wow. I've seen Van Halen 1984. If you went on eBay right now, you'd see some Kansas ones. I've seen 2 for the Show. I've seen Left Overture, Point of No Return. I don't have any because I know me. If I was to get one, and I can't afford it. So to me, the reel-to-reels is like a step beyond 8-tracks because like I didn't know until like the early 2000s that they sold reel-to-reels with albums on them. I always thought they were just strictly for recording, used in radio, or I just thought they were strictly for recording purposes. I had no idea they put retail albums on those things. and
Yeah.
sold them in a little box, a little bit bigger than a CD. And that's how some people consume their albums. I don't know if they were ever sold in stores. If you see them used, they're always like 50s, like musicals or classical or something like that. But yeah, there's some good rock albums that exist on reel to reel. It's pretty crazy.
Well,
Uh,
yeah.
getting back to Kansas, the sound of Kansas. For me, I thought they always sounded pretty unique. Um, they were very diverse, actually. I mean, they can have songs that had a Southern rock flair to them, then classical, and, it was just, hard rock. I mean, it could get very heavy, too.
Yep.
And I just love, like, all those, like, aspects, diving deeper into their catalog. Because, when I first bought Kansas, I mean, this is kind of pretty much what everybody probably bought.
It's a great 10-song best of, but I will say to anybody curious, get an original one.
This is an original one.
Drop Perfect Lover.
I am so thankful
Yeah.
for that.
And I hate that because a reissue should never take away, it should only add. Doesn't matter what anybody thinks of the song. Don't take away something that was on it. The only other place where that song appears is on a European 2-disc set called the Definitive Collection, and it's only if you get the 2-disc version.
I saw your show. You were on, was it your channel and you were actually talking about like the different kind of.
I think that might have been Mike Ladano.
I think it was before your book came out, so you didn't really get into your book yet. But you kind of touched on your book a little bit that it was going to come out, but then it wasn't out yet, so you didn't really reveal like anything too much about the book.
So many interviews, I don't know, but I do know that I talk about that a lot because it bugs me.
Yeah,
I'm not going to do that. But I love the cover. I love all the hidden imagery. That's what I tried to recreate with my book cover.
Go ahead, Joe. You had something?
This album. So this is actually how I got into Kansas. This is the album.
Here.
My parents had this album on cassette tape when I was growing up, and we wore it to dust. I knew every song on this album front to back. And being a little kid that only knows this album, I just knew the songs on this album. And so when I went to Walmart when I was probably 7 or 8 years old, and in the $5 bin, they had the remastered CD. Mm-hmm. And so, great. I don't have this on the CD. I'm going to pick it up. I take it, buy it, listen to it. Where's Perfect Lover?
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite songs on this album.
Live, which is cool because that was cut off too for the show when they put that on CD. But yeah, it's never. And you want to hear what order these songs are in on the 8-track?
Mm-hmm. Yes, please.
So program 1 is, geez, they've even got it written as "Carry On My Wayward Son." Who does that? And "No One Together" beginning. So program 2 is No One Together conclusion, Hold On, and The Wall. Program 3 is Dust in the Wind, Play the Game Tonight, Song for America beginning. And program 4 is Song for America conclusion, Fight Fire with Fire, and Perfect Lover.
Golly, that is a real messed up version of this album.
Yeah, it is.
Go ahead, Andy.
Oh yeah, Tim, you had said about the hidden messages in the album covers. Kansas makes some of the most unique album covers.
Yeah.
Especially in the ones in the 70s. In the 80s, they kind of got a little where they lost a lot of their artwork that they were doing. Now, what kind of hidden messages do you know about that popped out to you?
On the
covers, just anything on an album. Some kind of hidden message.
Boy, I don't. I do know one thing that I didn't notice. I had to read about it. Was finding out, the front and the back of this, where all of the albums are referenced, because they all are. But I kept thinking, well, there's nothing on there for Mask, but there is, because if you look in his beard, there's a fish. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And when the other one was Audio Visions, so I was like, I don't really see any Audio Visions on there, but his
It's his
The
hand.
hand that's in the back, he's got that black glove on. Oh, wait, no. Maybe that's not audio
Yeah,
vision. Maybe that's
the metal glove.
Yeah, or yeah.
No, that's audio vision because it's the metal glove.
Right. And drastic measures, I guess, is just the way he's dressed in the suit. But I love if you look
with
in the
like the
window,
red
you've
bow
got
tie.
the monolith looking through. You've got the obviously the
Yeah.
ship, and the song for America Bird is on top of the song titles, and but yeah, I mean, I love their album art. And it really makes a case for you should have these on vinyl because you just see so much more.
Oh yeah.
It's
When you were bringing up Audio Visions, I have to laugh because Audio Visions has one of the absolute coolest front covers, and then absolutely one of the
back cover,
worst
yeah.
back covers.
Yeah.
This is
I
awesome.
say this in the chapter on Audio Visions. That whole packaging screams 1980. It screams turn of the 80s, and I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way, but even down to the font that's used, because it looks like old video game font to me, which I like, but it's just very, very different than everything that came before. But at least they used the logo. That's one of my complaints when they don't. They've got the coolest logo, and then some albums they don't. Yeah, like, oh, guys, I don't understand. Like, I don't understand. I kind of think that Mask, you kind of understand because they were just starting and they didn't really know what they had. But once they started using it regularly, I think they should use it every time. I think Monolith is my favorite use of the logo with the feathers. I just think that's Monolith. Yeah, Monolith is just such a cool. I love that whole gatefold, that whole concept of it. Drastic Measures is a terrible album cover. I love that gatefold. Yeah, it's good stuff. It's good stuff. And like I said, those albums, we're talking about a band that's got a 5 million selling album with Left Overture, a 4 million selling album, Pointed Overture, a 4 million selling best stuff. But the other albums just aren't known like they should be, even though there's a lot of gold records in there. And their newer stuff, it's all very strong. Freaks of Nature, Somewhere Elsewhere, the two most recent ones. It's good stuff.
Yeah, I love this album, man. I love that last one they put out.
Yeah.
Great album, man.
These two are both phenomenal albums. I mean, the current lineup of the band, the fact that almost every single song on both of these albums was written by people that weren't in the band before these albums came out.
Exactly. Zach Risby's like
the classic
Lundgren of today, It's not just we need a guitar player. We need somebody that can write.
And he produced them.
Came into the band.
And he produced them.
Yeah, it's good. And they're good sounding albums, too. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to get into a little fun thing now. We're going to pick, our top 5 Kansas songs each. We'll go 5 around, 4 around, 3 around. That we'll do that way. We'll start off with Tim. We'll go to Joe and then Andy and then myself. So Tim, I'm sure all these lists are going to be completely different. But Tim, let's start off with 5, man. What's your 5th song pick here?
This is really hard.
I mean, listen, man. If somebody had to tell me to pick my top 5 Rush songs, I'd probably strangle myself. But I'm sure it's tough, man.
But these are 5 songs that I never ever get tired of, and that's the reason I happen to get this pile of 8 tracks out. The first time I heard the song was on here, and I got to go with "Song for America." It's a masterpiece, and Gary Livgren wrote it on a plane, and that's.
I read that in your book. I read that in your book, man.
That was so amazing to me. So yeah, that's my first one I'm mentioning anyway. I don't know if they're in order or not.
Okay, Joe, what do you got, brother?
Well, I'm going to hold this album up as well because the first time I ever heard this song was on this album, and that is also "Song for America."
Oh my god!
Yeah.
Honestly, it was always one of the songs that grabbed me the most, which is weird as a little kid that the 9.5 minute long epic is the one that grabs you. But I guess that just kind of was a little bit of a preview of what kind of music fan I was going to be. But "Song for America," just the lyrics and the vocals on top of just this epic instrumentation, and there's all these little movements in it, and then the solos and just all the different little parts and how it all kind of bleeds back in together. And honestly, and I know it's heresy to prefer an edited version, but I do prefer the edit on the Best of Kansas, where they edit like probably like 20 seconds out of like the very like kind of like the last couple minutes.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
I think it flows better on here than it does on the album Song for America. But that is my number 5 is also Song for America.
Song for America is, I say this in the book, they don't sound anything alike, but Al can relate to this. To me, it's like Xanadu by Rush.
Yes.
What I mean by that, it's a long song. It doesn't feel like a long song because you love every part of it, and it goes by, and you're like, "Oh, it's done already."
I agree 100% with you. Agree 100%.
And I feel the exact same way about Xanadu.
Yeah. Andy, go ahead, man. You're 5.
Yeah, this is going to be off of Mask, and I'm going to go with Icarus, Born on the Wings of Steel. Again, one of those epic tracks that has so much interplay in them. And most of my picks are going to be that they have that interplay element that separates them from anyone else. That's why, like Tim was saying, that they only had a couple of songs that were played on the radio. Well, the radio stations, even back then, were not going to touch this kind of interplay musical what's the word I'm looking for? Musical experiment.
Yeah.
And long winding tales and music that took you here and there. They will play everything's the same throughout the song. So that's why it's so fun to do this. So I'm going with like I said, Icarus, Born on the Wings of Steel off of Mask.
Great.
It's funny, man. I just mentioned before, all the lists are going to be different. But, like, my number 5 is Song for America as well. And, when I first got this CD, I mean, it was going back to high school. I mean, I graduated, my high school years were from 86 to 90. So, I didn't really know much about I certainly knew Carry On Wayward Son. I remember hearing that song, and that was kind of like, I was like, wow, that's a great song, man. But it was one of those things where I didn't dive further. It just, whenever it came on the radio or whatever, I loved it. And then finally, like in the early 90s or something, I was in a used CD. I was in a CD store and they had a used section, and I saw this. I'm like, I got to get this. I was looking at the track list and everything. And, I certainly knew Carry On. I knew Point of No Return. I kind of knew some songs already. So, but for the longest time, this is the only thing in my collection. I didn't dive any further than this. But then I got like Point of No Return, Left Overture, the big albums, and it wasn't until finally, like, maybe after seeing Kansas a couple months ago that I really got to start diving deeper into these guys. I already had this one because I saw it for cheap in Walmart, but I'm like, I really got to start, and I don't have the complete collection yet. I'm gradually getting all of them. So
get this box set. Get this box set.
That's got all. It's the complete album.
It's all the CBS album.
It's up to drastic measures.
Okay.
And they're all packaged really well. It comes with a nice booklet, and all the gatefolds, and it's really cool.
Al, if you want to hold up, or either of you could hold up your best of CDs and show the spine of them. So people will understand why my book looks the way it does on the spine.
Oh, okay.
Because I've always wanted to do this. It's got the impact font, red on white. Yes. I wanted it to look like one of the old CBS CDs.
Yes.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. So that's why, because originally, we wanted the cover to wrap around, but I thought, wait, no, I want to do this. Kansas on CBS. This is my opportunity.
That's cool. That's cool. I didn't notice that, man. But now that's really cool. You did it that way.
And it's on the shelf too, I got to say.
Yeah, this CD on the back here is. I mean, it must have been. You know what? It's got the CRC, so it's a Columbia Record Club. Yeah. It says disc manufactured in Japan, and then now made in the USA over here. So it must have been like an early press. I don't know how early pressing this is, but
It would have to be a slightly later pressing for it to say now made in the USA, because the first ones were all made in
was Japan, right?
That
Okay.
one I have the now made in the USA as well.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
mine too. I've got a very, very old monolith one, but that that's a whole other thing.
All right, so Song for America was my number 5. So go ahead, number 4, Tim.
I'm gonna go with something from my channel's namesake album.
Final Confession.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with the last song, Crossfire. Love that song. I think it's classic sounding Kansas. I think that Vinyl Confessions is a very good bridge album. I think there are traditional sounding Kansas songs on there, and then I think there's some more 80s sounding Kansas songs on there. I like the combination of the two, but I think Crossfire is classic Kansas. And when you have the interplay between John Elefant and Robbie Steinhardt, to me, that further reinforces what a great replacement for Steve Walsh he was. Because another thing about that Best of Kansas CD, when I first got into the band, pre-internet, I didn't know anything about this band. I did not realize they had a different singer on Fight Fire with Fire, Perfect Lover, Play the Game Tonight. Did not know it was not Steve Walsh.
Okay. Great one, man. Joe, what do you got for number 4?
All right. So this is a song that I've always loved, but really jumped up in my estimation when I got to see them play it live last year. And this is the song specifically that I am very hopeful that they put out a 50th anniversary live set, much like these. I really hope that they put out a live album of this current tour, just to hear the live version of The Pinnacle. I mean, a song that they played portions of it live back in the 70s, but they never played the whole song live until this tour this past year. And so this song just really leaped up in my estimation from seeing it live and then going back and hearing how amazing it was. And specifically, and this is something you cannot find on YouTube, if you go, and I found out this because of watching the awesome documentary Miracles Out of Nowhere. If you go on and just search it on Google, you can find an archive, not necessarily an archive, but a channel on like Daily Motion or something that has all of their appearances on Don Kirshner's rock concert. And most of them are not on YouTube. And they do the Pinnacle on Don Kirshner's rock concert, even though they never played it live at any other time. They played the full song live on Don Kirshner's rock concert, even though they weren't playing it on their tours. And so if you want to go back and see Kansas in 1975 just absolutely destroying the stage, go look up them doing the Pinnacle on Don Kirshner's rock concert, and it will blow you away.
And Don Kirshner is the one that signed them, right?
Yeah, it was Kirshner Records.
Yeah. Cool, man. Andy, what do you got for number 4, brother?
Yeah, I am going to go I'm going to go with one of their biggest hits off of this album here. I love this album cover; it's so great.
Oh yeah.
But, I'm going with "Carry On Wayward." So I used to just kind of despise that song, but as I grew older and really hearing the lyrics, you're like, wow, it really taught me. It talks about family and longing, and that's another good thing about Kansas writing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it just seems that a lot of the writings on certain songs have kind of a Christian overtone to their subject matter.
The interesting thing is that song would have been written prior to Carey's full-on conversion, because that wasn't until 1979. So I think whether he knew it or not, there was that longing there. And Kansas lyrics always tended to be quite positive too. Right. Yeah, many times as I hear "Carry On" the radio, you're still hearing Kansas on the radio. Not a bad thing. So I've never gotten tired of it. It's a great song.
Yeah, but it took me a while to really understand it. When you're younger and it came on the radio, I was like, oh. But as I grew older and started to become a completist of music, it's like, man, that song's pretty damn good. Really, really good. So that's my number 4.
All right. Well, my number 4, and and again, I've lived with this album for so long that I mean, I love, and Joan and I were talking before we went on the air that, I mean, sometimes bands do best ofs that don't really hit the mark. I mean, this is one of the best ofs a band ever put out, I think, really.
Yeah.
I mean, the track list on it is just phenomenal. So, I mean, my number 4 is going to be The Wall, the last song on here. Again, I mean, I used to play this thing all the way through, man. I never skipped songs. I never, did any of that. In the CD era, it's kind of a thing where, let me skip to the next one. I don't know. Whenever I put this on, man, I just listen to it all the way through. To me, it's almost like, I know it's a best of, but it's almost like a proper album by them too. I love the flow of the songs on here and everything. And The Wall ending.
Yeah. Used to hearing them in that order, and a lot of the songs on that album, the first time I heard them was via best of.
Yeah, so that's my number 4, The Wall. And we'll go to number 3, Tim.
Okay, this is an oddball track. Nobody's mentioned this album yet for songs anyway. It's a song that's grown on me more and more over the years from Monolith. I'm going to go with Angels Have Fallen. I think this is a really, really powerful song, and Steve Walsh's vocals on this track are unreal, and it's a shame he very rarely gets mentioned alongside the likes of Freddie Mercury and Steve Perry and Robert Plant. I think he's one of the best classic rock vocalists ever, and this album, maybe Audio Visions, might have been his vocal peak, because he does some performances on here that are just incredible. And Angels Have Fallen is one of the best, but I just think it's I think the whole album is quite a dark, moody album, but this one's also interesting because it's written by Steve Walsh, but lyrically it could have been written by Gary Livgren. But that's my pick for number 3, Angels Have Fallen.
Cool, man. Joe, 3.
Alrighty. So this kind of follows on with what both Al and Tim have said here, because it is a song that, in my opinion, features one of Steve Walsh's greatest vocal performances, and it's the song that Al just picked, and that is off the Leftoverture album, The Wall. I think that it's such an emotional song, and I think Steve's vocals are perfect on it, and I think the guitar playing on this song is amazing, just has such a feeling to it, and it's one of those songs where Kansas doesn't even. They have a tendency sometimes they go over the top a little bit with stuff. This is one that just kind of it hits exactly where it needs to, hits that kind of emotional core. The lyrics are really great. Steve's vocals are amazing. The band is so tight on this track, and it's weird. Like Al said, it's the song that closes this album, but it's track number 2 on this album.
Yeah. It feels like
it's very weird. It's very weird. It works amazing as a closer, but then when you realize, oh crap, Magnum Opus is the closer on this album, you're not going to beat out Magnum Opus as a closer. So, I'll happily take The Wall as track number 2 when you're dealing with Magnum Opus as the closer. So,
all right, cool, man. Andy, 3.
Wow, that's so funny that you would talk about the sounding of a track that closes an album and a song that's number 2 on the actual album. Because when you put on Monolith and it starts off with On the Other Side, the way that song starts, it sounds like it should be like in the middle of the album, because it starts off so immediately with riffing, just like you would expect it to come out in the middle of the album. Instead, when you drop the needle down, it's already there. It's already in your face. So that's why I went ahead and chose that to be on the list. On the Other Side, off the Monolith album, track 1.
I almost picked that instead of Angels Have Fallen, but Angels Have Fallen, the more I listen to it, the more I like it. I mean, for those that don't know, On the Other Side, that's where the title of this book comes from, Let It Be Your Guide.
Oh, okay.
So I was trying to think, what could I call this thing? And I was listening to Let It Be Your Guide, of course. And I love the videos for Monolith, by the way. If anybody out there hasn't seen the Monolith videos, treat yourself. They are amazing. And I mean that. They're great.
Those videos and the weird little promo video they did for the Best of Kansas.
What is up with
With,
that?
like,
That is
the
strange. That is a strange.
weird. The
So
kid in the
weird.
bedroom, and then all of a sudden John Brown's like coming out of the clouds and stuff.
Yeah,
and
is he
it's like,
good? Is he bad?
what
There's
is
like
this
Claymation
video?
figures come up and start playing Hold On. Yeah, and they do like 7 of the 10 songs from the best of. They didn't do a video. I know the band was pretty much broken up, but yeah, I saw that early on and I'm like, what is this? And then, yeah,
I was watching. There was this weird, like, when we couple, like, probably 10 or so years ago, when we had a little TV out in my kitchen and my dad had an antenna hooked up to it, and there was this channel that was just like one of like the random off channels that showed music videos every night, and they showed that, and I'm like, what is this? And it
Yeah.
said the Best of Kansas. I'm like, they made a music video for a greatest hits album, and it's just weird little clips of
I've
songs.
never
Just
seen anything like it
just the
before.
strangest thing.
Yeah. Yeah, even though some of the
It's on
songs
YouTube.
there
If
had
people don't, yeah, oh yeah. If people want to know what we're talking about, it is on YouTube. Just go up and look the Best of Kansas music video, and it's on YouTube.
Yeah, yeah, it's very strange. And then there's the Windows video where it's pretty literal. What's this about? Window. I love early music videos before anybody knew what they were doing. But those Monolith videos, it's cool seeing the band on stage, but then you get the guy in the costume from the front cover, and yeah, it's good stuff.
All right, man. Number 3, I'm going to touch. I think Andy touched on this one. Icarus Born on Wings of Steel from the Mask album, written by Kerry Livgren. The incredible vocals of Walsh. Great song, great epic sounding track. You know, I mean, I love the epics too. I love the interplay and all that stuff, man. That's the one thing I'm like, Kansas like has this interplay, and they can be very prog and everything, but still very, I don't know, accessible. You know, I think if I was gonna, you know, if somebody was like, you know, I'd like to get into prog, you know, usually I point them to kind of Genesis, but Kansas is another great, you know, band that maybe people could listen to and not get scared away with the prog elements. You know, I wouldn't certainly, you know, if somebody wants to dip their toe into prog, I'm not going to point them to ELP because they can get so over the top and things like that. You know, there's certain bands that take the prog to the utmost.
Yeah, look at this King Crimson.
Yeah, King Crimson. I mean, that's the top of the heap right there. You know, but Kansas is very accessible. I think like somebody who wants to try out prog and progressive music, but that's the thing about Kansas too, is they can be poppy, they can be heavy, they can have a southern rock kind of element to some of their songs, and they were so, like I said, so diverse in their songs. So, but number 3 is gonna be Icarus, Born on Wings of Steel for me. So, number 2, Tim.
Yeah, I read about that in the book. Like a lot of people say, "Oh, I don't like that 80s stuff." They went pop. To me, it's like they're versatile.
Yeah,
they try different things, and it usually works. So
yeah.
My number 2, it's again for nostalgic reasons from this very Audio Visions 8-track that I've got. The songs are mixed up, but the first song is the first song, and it's Relentless, and that is one of my favorite Kansas songs ever. I was so glad in '96 when they finally put Audio Vision's Vinyl Confessions and Drastic Measures out on CD. That was a huge hole in my CD collection. But yeah, Relentless is just a fantastic rock song. It's got elements of, it's melodic, it's got heavy riffing, it's dramatic, it's Phil's drumming on it is fantastic. It's a great Walsh vocal, it's got great backing vocals. The only drawback about that song, this was the second of the 2 self-produced albums they did. The guitar solo is a little bit buried under the rest of the track. I find it's hard to pick out what notes are actually being played. That's a minor thing. I love the end of it where it was, hey, like I love the whole track. That's always been one of my favorites. Relentless.
Very cool. Number 2, Joe.
All right. So this track is one of the biggest reasons that I would love to see Kansas live again, because it is one of the only songs that I really wanted to see them play that they did not play. And it's one that they normally play, so I understand them switching it out for something different. And that is the second track off of the great Point of No Return album, the relentless, get it, Paradox. I mean, what a great, short, hard-hitting track. It's another great vocal performance from Steve Walsh. It is just fast and furious, great harmonies from all the vocal harmonies on this song, really great interplay between the instruments. And this song and my number one are both really great examples of the unique sound of Kansas and why I think that one particular member of this band is so integral to their sound. And I'll talk about that when I get to my number one because it is a huge feature for him. And so to be continued on that. But yes, Paradox off of the Great Point of No Return album is my number two.
Cool. Andy, go ahead.
It's coming off the same album, but I am going to go with second to the last track of side one. That's Portrait He Knew is my number two. Here's the little Krishner logo here, right there in the bottom corner. If y'all can see that in it.
Yeah.
Over there. That's so cool.
Yeah, there you go.
There's not that many Krishner logos.
Another cool part about getting this CD box set.
Yeah.
All the CDs have the original Krishner label on them.
Cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, I like that label.
Yeah, and it's so because not that many stuff has that Krishner logo on there, so that's really cool to have. I'm a big sucker for logos, for like almost any kind of logo that looks really cool, So that's why I love baseball caps so much because baseball caps come out with so many different logos for one team. You have all this different stuff that they bring back from so many years ago, or just great marketing ploys, and I love it. I'm a sucker for them, and I buy them all the time. So that's my number two is Portrait He Knew.
All right, well, my number two, I'm going to be a little obvious in this one, but I mean, again, this is the song that I took notice of Kansas and how I came to know them. It's Carry On Wayward Son. I got to put that in here. That was the first song I really ever heard by them. And again, that's what made me notice them. And I know it's off of Leftoverture, but hearing it on here too, and I actually, because I'm a guitar player, I actually learned how to play that on guitar, and it's a great guitar song. It's one of the greatest riffs ever written, in my opinion. When we're talking about great riffs, that song should be in the conversation. I love it, and it's such a fun song to play. And I remember, finally learning it and playing it, and some friends would be over, I'd play it, and I'm like, oh wow, man, because everybody learns the Iron Mans and the Smoke on the Waters and all that stuff, but to pull that one out, it's kind of a little different. So it was cool, So that's my number two is Carry On Wayward Son. Let's go number one, man, Tim.
Real quickly, another great reason to own the original pressing of The Best of Kansas is both Carry On Wayward Son and The Wall are remixed on this.
Yeah.
And it's only on the original pressing, I believe.
Yeah.
And so another great reason to own the original pressing with the white label on the side and everything, aside from Perfect Lover being a great track.
What's the difference in the remakes?
No clue.
I think that if you were to listen to the Leftoverture versions and the best of, there's very little. There might be a little bit more echo on the drums, but they take time to mention it in the liner notes. So
okay,
yeah.
Okay,
yeah, it's minimal. It's minimal. There's no missing parts or anything like that.
Yeah.
For my number one, I got to go back to where it began. The first song I ever heard from these guys, All I Wanted. I think it's a perfect little mid-tempo rock ballad. I think Steve Walsh sings it beautifully. It did okay on the charts. It hit number 19, but I think it should have done a lot better. But if you go to the end of '86, there was a lot of competition on the charts. But I think MCA pulled the promotion. They had to have, because it was on the radio all the time. I would hear that several times a day on the station that I listened to, and then I just didn't hear it at all. I was really surprised to find out that wasn't a top 10 single. I just figured it would have been. But I love the song. There's other songs on Power I like almost as much. Like I love Silhouettes in Disguise. I love the title track. To me, the title song Power was one movie soundtrack away from becoming a hit. I love Tomb 19. I think that was a great. That's like the soundtrack to the missing Indiana Jones film in between Temple of Doom and The Last Crusade. But yeah, All I Wanted.
Awesome.
First song I ever heard by them.
All right, Joe, you're one.
All right, my number one is a song so great that they named a documentary after it, and that is, of course, featuring the vocals of the legendary Robbie Steinhardt, "Miracles Out of Nowhere" off of the Leftover album. This is probably one of my top 10 songs of all time, period, from any artist. It is a very personal song for me. The lyrics are just really, really kind of powerful to me. And to me, like I said, I was going to talk about it a little bit. Robbie Steinhardt is kind of the glue for me of Kansas. I mean, you have Kerry Livgren's awesome songwriting and you have Steve Walsh's vocals on a lot of those songs. But right there in all those songs, even if he's not singing on them, you have Robbie Steinhardt's amazing, amazing playing. And that really brings that unique sound to Kansas that no other band had. I mean, no other band had a violin player like the way that they used a violin player in this, unless you're kind of talking about something like Frank Zappa or King
Jean-Luc
Crimson
Ponty.
for a while or
Yeah.
something like that. If you pull out Jean-Luc Ponty or you pull out,
Yeah.
I know King Crimson had some violin for a little bit in the early 70s, but like no one used it as kind of
A prominent.
in the forefront of their music.
Yeah.
Like Kansas did. And I think Robbie Steinhardt is such an important part of this band in general and the sound of the violin. And that doesn't take anything away from the violin players that they've had since Robbie Steinhardt. I think both of them have been amazing, especially what their current violin player is doing, and especially to step in so quickly when, oh God, why can't I?
Ragsdale.
Give me a second. Ragsdale. When David Ragsdale had to leave pretty much less than a month before the tour started last year, and they brought their new violin player in, and he has done an amazing job and fit right in and brought such passion and such energy to that music. And I think he fits right in with the current lineup of Kansas that just really is bringing this music to life in such an amazing way. And you still have Phil E. Hart and Rich Williams and Billy Greer that are still providing that solid base, but you have people like Tom Brislin and you have people like Ronnie Platt that are just bringing such energy to these songs. And that's what so many bands, I think, don't have. You have bands, the most successful bands to me that are still being successful of these kind of that era of bands is bands that are really, one, embracing their entire catalog like Kansas does, as well as integrating new members and their creative influences. Another great example of that for me is Blue Oyster Cult with Richie Castellano, and allowing him to really step fully into the band as a creative force. And he brings such an energy to Blue Oyster Cult that you still have those classic members, but you have such a youthful kind of creative force. And Kansas has done that in such a really great way. And that's why I think there's one of the only bands that is still not only surviving from that era, but what other band are you seeing on their 50th anniversary tour that sounds that good? I mean, these are songs that have been around for 50 years. There are members on that stage that have been playing these songs for 50 years, and it sounds like they just wrote them yesterday. And it's amazing to see. And again, to anyone who is a Kansas fan or maybe just getting into Kansas or hasn't gotten into Kansas yet, do yourself a favor. Go see the current lineup live and buy the last few albums, because it's amazing what this band is still doing out there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I agree, man. Andy, you're number one, brother.
Yeah, my number one has been talked about. So it's going to be obvious. It's going to be off of Left Hand Overture, but a magna opus. I mean, how else are you going to end an album? You know, we've had shows. I'm not too sure if it was us or BES sessions where it was closers, and we always talk about how great a closing song is on an album, because that's the lasting effect that you have from that album. So it's so important to have a great closing song, and that's what magnum opus is for me on this. That's what completes such a great album. It was a great opener and a great closer and everything in between. So that's my number one.
I gotta agree with my partner, man. My number one's magnum opus. I gotta tell you, man. I mean, that whole side two of that album, really,
Oh yeah,
is, I mean, top to bottom. I mean, that whole album, top to bottom, is just incredible. But but I was listening to Magnum Opus yesterday. I was actually listening to it on headphones, and I mean, great production and everything. And is that Jeff Glicksman producing that one?
Yeah, great sounding album.
He would start in his second album and kind of go. How many albums in would he produce?
He produced from Song for America up to Point of No Return. Then he came back to Freaks of Nature, and I think he produced part of, or co-produced the thing with Implicit was Zach Lister.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, listening to it, it's so majestic. It's so just kind of just epic, and I remember, like, there's a certain part in the song, I was like, damn. Now I know where Opeth ripped off the band Opeth. Definitely was influenced by Kansas, because one of Opeth's songs, I hear parts of Magnum Opus in there, man. I know Michael Ackerfeld, he loves prog rock. That's like his thing. And definitely he was listening to this song, when he was writing some Opeth songs, man. So I gotta say, man, like, so when I hearing it, I was like, yeah. I hear where Opeth got that idea from, But I mean, it's such a great song, man. I gotta make that my number one, because I love epic, songs. And like Andy said, but what a way to close the album out, man. I mean, just in a grand fashion like that, So that's my number one. So I want to thank everybody on here. So Tim, let us know where you can get the book. You got like a website where you can get it, or you can get it on Amazon? Anything?
Amazon. Yeah, all my books are available on Amazon, and wherever your local Amazon is.
Oh, we lost them.
Hold on.
We lost them.
That was his big grand time.
Is he? Oh, no, there he is. There he is.
Yeah, all my books are available on Amazon. So, if it's UK or Australia, or I've sold books all over the world, but you'll see this one and you'll see all three of my books. So yeah, thank you for giving me the chance to plug it. And again, I got to say, it's not all about me. It's about the great contributors. And it's a good, if you've always been curious about this band, you're like, I don't even know where to start. Sometimes you Google, it's like you get everything, or you get the same predictable things. This is like, no, here's each album, here's the songs on it, this is what they look like, here's what people think about them, and you make up your mind whether you think that'll be a good entry point. There is a section at the end of it where I talk about the live albums and the compilations, and there's even an interview with Denise de Lacerda, who was a cover designer for the last two studio albums and the last two live albums. I had the pleasure of speaking with her. I had her on an episode, and a lot of that episode was transcribed for her interview. And Denise was even kind enough to send me a 50th anniversary poster, which I'm proudly hanging on the back of my door. So she's done a lot of awesome artwork for the band.
I love the format. I'm hearing it. You guys hear it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, I love the format of the On My House. So this is a great book. If you don't have it, you're into Kansas, definitely get it. So Tim, thank you so much. Check out Tim's channel, Tim's Vinyl Confessions on YouTube. Great channel. Subscribe to it. And the echoes really annoying. What a way to go out.
I will say in closing, you can see all these great albums here. There is one thing that I do not own, and I will never own, and I cannot stand it. and that is the atrocious covers album that they did in the late 90s.
Oh, they did a covers album.
And I they did Always Never the Same, isn't it called?
Oh, that's okay. Yeah. So they're covering. They only do one cover on it. That's the orchestral album. I never listened to it.
I thought they did a couple covers on it.
No, they cover Eleanor Rigby. That's the only cover.
Okay.
There's 3 new tunes on it, and the rest are all reworks of older songs. Yeah, I never listened to that one. Yeah, I was going to say, well, there's a covers album, and I don't know about it. How is this possible? Was it unreleased?
I thought it was a covers album. I'm sorry. Yeah, no, I thought
it opens with a cover of Eleanor Rigby. And a lot of bands from that era were doing covers albums in the early 2000s. So that's an honest mistake.
All right, cool. Andy, what we got going on next week?
Yeah. Next week. I don't know why this is. That's weird. But they gotta happen at the show. We're gonna be on it. And we are top albums of the year 1980. So and I will be, and Jimmy Schwartz will be with us. So we're looking.
It's a good year.
All right. Yeah, 1981 year.
Yeah.
So Tim, we're going to end it here because damn Michael is annoying. I want to thank you again. We're going to have you on the show. Hopefully, we'll talk a little Rush, bands, whatever. It was a pleasure meeting you. And hopefully we'll talk And on that note, have a great night, everybody.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
It was very nice.
Yes, nice meeting all of you. We'll do this again.
Oh, yeah.
Cheers.
Bye, everybody.